Hello everyone, today we are taking a look at the CineOn20 from AxisFlying. I think it's Cine or Scene or Cinema kind of. It's a CineWhoopy sort of thing. Primarily designed for that slow sort of flight, but as you can tell with my camera angle, did some faster flight testing. And in this video, we'll also be comparing to the GepRC 2-inch version as well. That will be near the end of the video because we're going to just cover this one first. As you can see, mine has got some grass stains to it. That's because, when I fly, I sometimes crash. And in my environment, it's mostly grass. Also note, it is a pusher, meaning the motors face downwards. And those motors are C135, which I believe that's 1305s, 3500 kV. And on those motors, we've got the 2-inch tri-bladed gem fan props. I believe those are the 2023, although they list them on their site as the D51 props. Look identical to the 2-inch gem fans I've been flying for a while. Kinda hard to see up in there, but that all-in-one is a 20 amp all-in-one, and it is an F411. Of course, it does have your OSD on it, as it has been for many years with all-in-ones. And as you can tell, mine has the Walksnail VTX in there. This is the V2 kit, so it does have gyro data on it, as well as 32 gigabytes of onboard storage. And it has the new camera as well. Mine came with Express LRS, so we have our T-style antenna out back here. Rubberized and texturized battery mat that is toilet tanked on the quad. External HD camera mount, as we oftentimes see with these. Gummied top plate for that external HD camera to sit on, which our FPV camera is also attached to. That camera plate looks to be somewhere just a touch over 1 millimeter thick. The main carbon plate looks to be 2.5 millimeters thick. And motor post to motor post, I'm getting at just about 94 millimeters. It weighs 136 3/4 grams. The Cinelog comes in a little bit lighter at 130.5 grams. In the slower flight, I fly it on the 660 milliamp 4S battery, which brings the weight up to 200 grams. In the faster flight, to maintain some agility, I did fly it on this 530 milliamp 4S GNB battery, which with that battery comes in at 187.5 grams. With the naked GoPro, it weighs 186.8 grams. With the naked GoPro and the 660 4S battery, it weighs 250 grams and a quarter, just a touch over. Same configuration with the 530 milliamp battery, it weighs 237.5 grams. For the accessories, we do get an extra set of props. We get an extra pad that goes on the bottom of the quad, a lead to plug in your naked GoPro, an extra battery strap, an Allen wrench, a screw to go right through there. I didn't use that. And then got some sort of USB adapter. I didn't use that because it didn't have a need, because the all-in-one flight controller has got a USB port built right into it. And then I also have the leads already that you plug in for the Walksnail. I suspect that is so you can plug in the Walksnail pretty easy. When I say Walksnail, I am referring to the VTX itself, not the camera. Some extra foam strips if you want to put those around the outside edge. It's got some instructions here. It's not very long. It's kind of a one-pager. It says Z20 up here, but the website says C20. Before we get started, or as we get started, note that this is the DVR file from the goggles. I am using the small or the special edition VRX on the front of my HD0 goggles, so through HDMI. And we also have the OSD on here. No, it does not record natively like this. So I did process through an application which I featured on the channel before in order to add the Betaflight OSD, which it does record the data, it just doesn't embed it in your video like this. So I pre-processed that, and then I added in my sound after the fact. Obviously, if you can tell by me sitting at the table, this is a lunchtime run. We've got full brightness outside, which is good if we're looking for micro vibrations in our camera. Of course, probably better to watch that outside, but you can always look at it here on the inside as well. I am flying the smaller 530 milliamp battery inside as well, just to help myself not crash quite as much inside. I think inside, not necessarily in a house, of course it's completely doable in a house, more so than say a 3-inch CineWhoop, but this one is really small, so you're buying this or getting this or building one like this in order to get into tight spaces, whether that's actually inside in a house going through maybe some specialty gap in a real estate fly through, maybe there's some sort of art installation or anything that you can think of where you might need a small quad. And yeah, I do bump some things from now and then, not a flawless flight. We won't watch the entire flight, but some things I think you want to pay attention to within the OSD. One is the throttle value in the top left-hand corner. The flight time is in the bottom right, and then our voltage in the bottom left. Top voltage number is the average per cell, which is what I go by because I fly micros. So I'll fly a bunch of stuff from 1S all the way up to, well, I've even actually flown a few 6S quads. So it's easiest for me to remember the voltage that I want to stop and land and disarm at 3.5 volts per cell, which is the top number on the left. The bottom number is the overall voltage. You may do it differently. That's just how I do it. It's the way I've been doing it here on this channel for several years now. And so if you come here, you know where to expect this stuff. I always put it in the same places on the screen. Flight time on this will scoot forward so that you can see the end of the flight time. That way I don't have to try to remember or look away at my notes. Coming in at our last pass, you can see our battery voltage there getting just below 3.4 volts per cell, so we're going to land. And we've come down on the table, nearly blowing the paperwork off. A little over 4 minutes of flight time, and our battery, now that it's disarmed, is starting to recover. It'll continue to come up a little bit. Now we got to 3.5 volts per cell, so 403, 3.5 volts per cell. Perfect! Okay, we're outside. This is an evening time flight, so not directly overhead sun, but low winds. Winds 7 to 11 miles an hour. Of course, I feel like a broken record that I'm kind of bending everyone's ear when I say this stuff all the time. If you visit the channel regularly, I maybe expect it, maybe you are tired of it, I'm sorry. It's not really kind of what I have to do, or not kind of what I want to do and bend your ear with repetitive information, but you never know who's watching for the first time and who might be doing their research on a particular quad. So wind data is important when it comes to micros. Something else that you noticed is kind of the smearing or blurring. I updated from, I think it was 2.9. Oh, geez, I can't remember the version number. I should have wrote that down, but I know it was pre 3.3, and this is on 3.3.10.9 or something like that. It's the latest version as of the date this video was published, or at least I'm recording here, which is on May 26th. 2023, I guess I should say. But that new version, I just don't think is as good. You know, it may fix some other problems that I wasn't sensitive to, but when it came to the overall image quality, it just wasn't as good. Of course, that's kind of in our digital systems, that's kind of something that comes and goes. If we find one that we like, we probably should stick with it. Of course, we're always looking to upgrade because we're looking to see what we're missing out on. And in this case, I upgraded, and I don't think it's as good. So this doesn't show as good as you might otherwise expect. But do know that if you had, say, an older version of the firmware on this quad, that the blurring that you saw, especially when we went down to the little creek over there, it's much sharper with the older version. I just don't think the transmission or something is as good on this new version. So hopefully they'll get to fixing that, and with the next new version, it will all get fixed. You'll also notice it in the grass. At least I'm noticing it more than I have previously. I don't want to overstate it as though I study the different firmware versions. It's just when I flew this, I knew I upgraded it, and I went, and I've since flown another one on the same version. Same sort of feeling is that it used to be better, I think, on the older version. So something to note there. Again, I have all my OSD elements in the usual spots, so if you're looking for that information, it is available there to watch. Normally, most people are looking at for the throttle value as to how much you're using. The smaller the quad, the more throttle you use. So if you add an external HD camera, which I did use in a slow outside flight with the 660 milliamp, it did shave off about 25 to 35 seconds. That's a naked one, so if you put one on there that weighs more, then it will take more flight time off. If you put one on that weighs less, then it'll take less flight time off. That's just kind of how weight works in our quads, especially micros, which tend to be a bit more sensitive, as we see that branch that needs to be cut down because it's dead. Eventually it's going to fall down and probably land on the fence and then cause me to, at the very least, do a fence repair. So I need to get my pole saw out and chop that branch down. I've noticed I think it's been dead for over a year because that's an area where I find a lot of dead branches out in the yard after the winds really kick up. So this flight's going to go on for a while. Let's go ahead, now that we've watched about 3 minutes of footage, let's go ahead and move forward towards the end of the flight. So you can see our battery voltage is flashing at us there. I tend to fly about here, and then I come in for my landing and then hope that it recovers after disarming up to 3.5 volts. You see the flight time there at 5 minutes and 37 seconds. And our battery voltage, by the time we get back to the default screen, has already recovered to 3.53 volts per second. So good shape, could have flown a touch longer, but not too much more. Outside flight, and I think this is the same day that I recorded that slow flight on. Even though the slow flight, I think there was one day where I was flying around with the pool cover off at lunchtime as well, because I'd been doing some pool cleaning. I think it was lunchtime. I don't know. I looked at the footage earlier today and then started going through all the processing to put the OSD stuff on there. Of course, if you take the recording straight out of the Walksnail VTX, it won't have the blurring and stuff that you might be seeing otherwise that are transmission related to the image quality. But as typical on this channel, videos tend to be a little bit longer on these guys because I do several different sorts of flights. I think it's important, and of course you're in control of how much you watch or how long you spend on the videos. I appreciate all those who tend to come and be more thorough about the research, so I tend to make longer videos specifically on these because there is potential for several different flight styles on these. I am using the Zorro radio as well, so I'm fully comfort. I think one thing about flying these things faster that I probably have lacked in saying in the past is that you're going to have to compensate with more throttle with that weight. So as the more aggressive you fly, the more of an adjustment you're going to have to make versus something that doesn't have prop guards and has more prop with less weight on it. So I've kind of gotten used to that process. You can see here that when I'm making turns that I'm getting into the 70s on some of these at speed turns. On my throttle value, that may be something that you want to pay a special attention to, but when you're flying something like this more aggressively, you just have to use more throttle. You might have to bank more on your turns. You just have to use everything you can at your advantage or at your disposal in order to accomplish the flight. So it's not as though it's going to be, I don't want to say, it's not normal, and if you're not used to it, you may find it fairly cumbersome to fly something like this in the flight style that you're seeing on screen. You have to kind of come out of dives a little bit sooner than you might otherwise, or you have to compensate with adding throttle a little bit sooner to kind of get the prop spun up so that you can come in for those flattening out periods of dives. But I think it's important to know it doesn't fly as well as something that weighs less that doesn't have prop guards if you compared 2-incher to 2-incher. Okay, I've talked so long. Flight has ended 3.62. Could have gone another 5 to 10 possible seconds, so 2 minutes and 30 seconds. So if you're interested in this, I'll have a link down in the video description. Do know that it comes in several different versions. It does come with the DJI-03 air unit, which is quite popular with many people. I don't know if it's because of the DJI Avata, excuse me, or if it's just the image quality of the 03. So you can get it in Walksnail and the DJI 3. I don't see it either. I'm just not seeing it on the website, but I would think you could get this with a Vista as well. So if you would prefer to go that route, the 03 is going to weigh the most. So if you calculate all the weights I have on this video, I would add 10 to 15 grams because I think that 03 unit weighs 30 plus grams versus none. I don't think any of the other HD video transmission systems weigh anywhere nearly as much as the 03. It's got a larger camera, it's got a larger VTX. Even the cabling between the two is going to be heavier because of the braiding and the materials that they've used. So do know that the 03 version is going to come in not only heavier, but it's going to cost you more as well. But you should know that if you're flying 03 already. So there aren't a lot of things that we would cover on this one that would be differently. I just want to highlight a few things that may not be readily noticeable. So this is a print at the lower part of each one of these standoffs and the upper part. That fills that gap in our metal standoff so that our prop protection stays in the prop line. Also, I didn't think this one was as loud as we oftentimes hear in this sort of form factor. But you may think differently. Of course, go back to anything that you're interested in. I have flight audio for all of them using the same camera at pretty much the same location all the time, so you should be able to gauge that. I started to rotate this around because it does look like they've created this print not only to hold your receiver, which is right down here, but it looks like a mini GPS is intended, but they just haven't included it. But if I look at their website, they do show them with what looks to be a GPS chip in there. This one does not have that in there, so if you're looking for something in this size with the GPS, make sure you're looking at the product pages very closely to make sure it says it includes it. Of course, this video won't tell you about the performance because it's not there. This prop protection is fairly flexible, and because of that, I don't know if it will just bend in crashes and recover, or if it will bend to a certain point and snap, or it will you hit something solid and hard, whether it will just snap. My gut reaction is that with tri-blades that it'll probably be safe to, you know, as you can see when I squeeze things, if I get a prop in line, yeah, it will, but I was thinking it would spin out of way, but it should. I'm just not, well, I guess the impact has to be in the right spot with tri-blades versus something like the Gepar C. It's using four-bladed or quad-bladed props. It's more likely to get stuck, but this is where the comparison part comes in. Both are very, very similar in flight. They both fly like CineWhoops. They're heavy. They're meant to fly slowly. They both have platforms that the FPV camera as well as the external HD camera would be mounted to, and they're both independent, and neither one of them is mounted down outside of the gumpy. If you had an external HD camera on either one of these and then you had a violent crash, it's very likely, an at-speed violent crash, it's very likely that these little rubber bits on either the top or the bottom are going to pull out and this platform could end up on the ground. Then, of course, you're relying on your FPV camera cabling in order to keep it all attached. In a really exciting, dramatic crash, I guess it's potential. I've not heard of anyone doing it yet, but jerking this loose out of the camera or out of the VTX, which would be bad. But very, very similar as far as their mounting. Because this camera is so proud in the C20, I guess you could technically say that the Gepar C CineOn20 does have a little bit more camera protection because it's just not quite as proud. Let's face them both together here. You can kind of see my camera angles that both were last flown with a faster flight style. You can also see on the profile here that while it may seem equal, as I look at it, the 20, as far as the vertical profile, the CineOn20 isn't going to be quite as tall, but if you're flying with an external HD camera, then it looks like the potential is the C20 over here from AxisFlying may not have as much of a tall vertical profile just because how the mounting works its way out. Both have pads on the bottom to protect you or to assist in softer landings. You can see the Gepar C comes with the foam pads around it. I'm not a big believer in that doing much than adding style. That's why I didn't apply it to this one. But you know, if you like to put the foam or you like the idea of having that little extra protection, potential protection, I wouldn't say that it's guaranteed by any stretch. You can apply it to the AxisFlying one as well. The USB ports on both of these aren't equal. So of course I should highlight that is this one's Walksnail and this one's Vista or Link over here. But the USB ports are both available. This does not have a USB port. It's got that connector down here that we connect to USB in order to get to update firmware and to get the video footage off of the VTX. So they're pretty much equal there. As far as the USB port for the all-in-one, it's a little bit easier to get to with the CineOn20 than it is the AxisFlying because it's kind of at an angle and you do have to have kind of either the right length of USB connector, a short stubby one, or you're going to need to use a right angle connector, which they don't include. And it's going to need to be a fairly long nosed right angle connector because it's kind of set, I don't know if you can see that, it's set in kind of deep from the prop protection. But I had a USB cable that had a little bit of a shorter end to it, not the very end that plugs in, but the overall length of the connector. And so I was able to get it in there without disassembling. That's something that comes up quite often. I try to remember to highlight it, but sometimes I do forget. As far as the flight characteristics, they're both very, very similar. I would encourage you to watch both videos with the eagle eye to decide for yourself. I did fly them back to back. They fly similarly, but yet different. I wouldn't want to say either one flies better than the other. It just was too close to call that. There wasn't some standout performance or feature that made me say, oh, this definitely flies better than the other. But of course, you know, you could draw your own conclusions. It's just a question that I planned that will come up is the comparison between these two. Now, for the prop protection, there is two things that I have to highlight about the C20, is that the prop protection is all one. It's connected together here. Hopefully you can see that. It comes through. So in order to get the prop protection on and off, you've got to take the bottom part out, and then you've got to take the prop protection all the way down. I presume you'd want to go down because otherwise you've got to take all the motors off. Whereas on the CineOn20, you have to unscrew the motors, so 4 screws, and then maybe you probably have to take the prop off as well, so 2 more screws there, and you can replace each one of these independently. And when it comes to the sturdiness or the robustness, I think this style works better in a really small form factor like the 2-inch. And this feels more flexible, so at the very least you're going to damage more props, and it may not be quite as durable. It's always hard to tell. If you were to nail me down and put a gun to my back and say, hey, you got to pick one for more durable, I would have to pick the CineOn20, just because of how hard this feels. I could be wrong in that, but this feels awful flexible, so at the very least we're going to damage more props. I worry about it being so flexible and getting to a point where there's just too much of a bend and then it's snapping. Of course, if you fly these sort of things and you want to repair them, I like to use welder glue. Typically it comes in a red tube, but I've got it linked way down in the video description of the things that I tend to use quite a bit. I like this because it adheres really good to plastic, and as well as it stays pliable. The downside is that it takes like 24 hours to set up, so you can't do a quick repair. I don't recommend crazy glue because crazy glue makes that spot hard, and it's either going to break right there again or right next to it if you have the same sort of crash, whereas it shouldn't break in the same spot again if you use welder, because it'll stay flexible, so it'll flex with the impact and then it'll recover when the impact goes away. That's why I like to use this. E6000 is another one that everybody likes to use. You hear oftentimes with micro enthusiasts, whoopers especially. E6000 and welder are the two go-tos. Shoe goo gets recommended from time to time. I think shoe goo is not what I would go with just because it's heavier, and I don't think it sticks as well as welder does. Especially when you're applying thin coats. It may stick as well when you're applying it a little bit more. But, I used to use shoe goo quite a bit in my baseball days. Works well on shoes. I just don't think it works quite as well in plastic. The plastic part of the shoe was the first part that shoe goo would pull off of. The leather would stick around on the shoe, but it would pull off the plastic first. So the other thing you have to look at is receiver options and video transmission options on what you're getting on these two. I can't really decide that for you because, you just have to look at them, the product pages, and see. Also the price. I did not look at the price before I started recording this video, and that's going to be an important data point on which one you want to go. I think this one's going to be more durable. It has the advantage of being able to replace independent prop protections versus if this prop protection gets broken to a point where you can't repair it with welder or E6000, you've got to pull it all off and get a new one. But if you want GPS, this looks like the option between the two of them that does have GPS, because unless GepRC has changed something on the CineOn20, no GPS back here or anywhere. You've probably been looking at it, but the frame designs on these are very, very similar. Again, I think the biggest difference is on the front end of the CineLog, where the camera is set back just a little bit versus the C20 over here from AxisFlying. The camera's more proud. Or out front, I guess is another way you could put it. And they both run XT30s for their battery connection, if I didn't mention that already. So that is the CineOn C20 from AxisFlying, as well as a little bit on the GepRC CineLog 20, which rolls off the tongue a little better for me. I don't think you would go wrong with either one of these because they fly so similarly. It's just all the other things you have to compare, and we already kind of covered them in detail here, so you can make a choice on which one you want to go with. I think they fly just about the same, if not, well, it's close enough to where I can't call a clear winner between one to another. Maybe someone out there can. I just can't. If you do have any comments, questions, suggestions, or otherwise about the CineOn C20 from AxisFlying, please let me know in the comment section below. I appreciate your time. Thanks for watching.